everybody to our special event with Australian author Tricia Stringer tonight. I'd like to start tonight by acknowledging that we are broadcasting from beautiful traditional lands of the Gunditjmara people, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present and their emerging leaders, and acknowledge the deep connection that the Aboriginal people had and still have with Gunditjmara country where we are broadcasting from. And Tricia Stringer, who's one of our favourite writers here at Glenelg Libraries, is tonight talking about her newest novel, Birds of a Feather. She grew up on a farm in country South Australia. She has spent most of her life in rural communities and has owned a post office and a bookshop, and has been a teacher and one of her own, a librarian. She's now a full-time writer, lives on the beautiful Copper Coast region with her husband Daryl, travelling and exploring Australia's diverse communities and landscapes, and she shares her passion for the country and its people through her authentic stories and their vivid characters. Welcome, Tricia. So nice to see you.
Thank you, Tanya. You too, and hello, everybody.
Yeah. So, Tricia, Birds of a Feather is your newest novel. Can you tell us a little bit about the story and what inspired you to write it? And I'll just hold it up for all of those people. I'll try and get it in the right spot. There we go. There's the cover. Tell us a little bit more about it.
This story, I think, in part was perhaps been bubbling away for a long time. I live on the Copper Coast, as you say, which is on the side of Spencer Gulf, and on the other side of Spencer Gulf on Eyre Peninsula is a place called Port Lincoln, and I used to live there. And so Port Lincoln and Wallaroo, where I live now, are home base to the Spencer Gulf prawn fleet. And I've always wanted to somehow involve that in the story, but never ever knew how or what would happen. And then a different thing happened with my daughter and I having coffee in Adelaide one day. We were sitting beside another couple a bit like us. We thought mother and daughter, and we got chatting, and it turns out they weren't mother and daughter. The younger woman's mother had died several years prior, and the older woman was her mum's best friend. And that lovely relationship, I thought, how wonderful that is. It sort of made me think of then other relationships that we have and other friendships that we have. So those two things were bubbling away. And then along came the character of Eve, who's the main character in Birds of a Feather. And she's a woman who's turned 70. She's run her own business all her life. She's been on her own for quite a bit of her life. And she is faced with a dilemma. And so for me, I knew all of that, but I didn't know what business. And then suddenly it all just fell into place. I thought, aha, she's going to own a prawn trawler and be part of that business. And so that's how Eve came along. And as the story begins, Eve has had an accident. She's hurt her shoulder and she needs some home help and some nursing care. And she finds Lucy, who's a young woman who's recently moved to the town. She hasn't met many people yet. Her partner's a FIFO worker, so she's often on her own with her two children, but she helps Eve. And so together they're sort of bumbling along, and then Eve's goddaughter, Julia, turns up out of the blue from Melbourne. And Julia's a research scientist, and she's decided to come home for a visit, and she sort of throws a little bit of a spanner in the works. And the three of them are quite different women, very independent women. And so the story begins with them, trying to make a way for it together, but also reveals then that they each have a personal loss or something that they're grappling with that causes conflict. And so yeah, that's part of the whole story.
Oh, apologies, I'm on mute now. So definitely at those different important stages of their lives, and like you say, the three main characters, Eve, Julia, and Lucy, are perhaps at defining stage of their lives, and have that very very different relationships between those characters, but some that we can certainly relate to, for sure, throughout.
Yeah.
We all know these characters, I think, in our head.
Yes, we've probably all been through something.
Yeah. So this is your fourth book in women's contemporary fiction space. Do you feel that this is a genre that you're meant to write in, and why do you love it so much?
It sort of fell into my lap a little bit. I started writing, as readers perhaps know, rural romance, and loved doing that and enjoyed writing those stories. And I've also written the historical saga, the Flinders series. But when I got the idea for A Table for Eight, I knew it didn't fit either of those categories. And I thought, I think I've got an idea here, but I don't know how it fits. So I talked to my publisher about it. Yep. And she said, well, write it and see how it goes, see what comes out. And that turned out to be the first then of a more broadly women's general fiction, or, it's got so many names, hasn't it? There's all sorts of books that category.
Yes.
Some people call it life lit. I don't know. It's, it is, I guess, about our lives and the people that we meet, the people that affect us, our family, our friends, and the things that happen to us. So that worked really well for Table for Eight. And I just feel that, my head's full of more stories now of that genre.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love the genre because it's easy to read. And like I say, we can relate to the characters. People can see people that they know in the characters, and I think that always makes an enjoyable read. Yeah. Can you give us a bit of insight into the setting base for your novels? And this one, as you say, is probably quite close to home for you, and because we've spoken to you before, I knew where you lived. So when I was reading this book, I'm thinking, this is like you're writing about your own backyard. Do you always have a particular setting in mind when you write? And the other follow-up to that is, do you find that people always try to pick themselves out as your characters, particularly when you are writing so close to home?
Well, if I go with the setting first, the setting is very important to me. It is like another character in the story, and I really get it right. So it's usually somewhere I've been and experienced, and if I haven't, then I try and go there. But with this book, of course, I tried to imagine setting it in some fictitious place, and really I thought everybody's going to know. Anybody who knows this area will know that it's Wallaroo. So I changed the name to Wallaby Bay so no one would know. And, it's big secret.
Yes, yep.
But it is obviously, yes, based this time on my hometown of Wallaroo, and I did change the name, and Wallaroo is a lovely place, got a beautiful beach. We've got lots of lovely coffee shops and hotels and accommodation, and it's a holiday destination. But you will find none of the places in the story here. So they, except for the museum, although it's not like the museum in the story. So yes, so you'll find Wallaroo and you'll find lots of lovely places, but of course I made up all of the people and all of the places. And yes, I get people certainly who contact me and say, now I think I've worked out, in other books, not this one yet, but in other books, I've worked out where that house was that you had Alice living at Marion Bay, and in Family Inheritance or something like that. And I've gone, well, I wonder how they did that, because I made it up.
It's all in your head.
That's right. But and as far as characters go, I certainly haven't based them on anyone that I am aware of in the community. So I hope that people won't think I've written about them, or maybe they'll think, oh, I really like that character, I hope that's me. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
But no, I haven't yet. I've occasionally in the past had people say to me, oh, a character reminds them of someone. And I think that's more about the foibles that a character might have, or a mannerism or a speech, or the way they react to something. We see that, and we might see that in someone we know. So it reminds us of them.
We recognise it.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about COVID just for a minute on you know, an interest note. Obviously, it's affected everyone's lives. I know at the end of this book you wrote a little about the influence of COVID while trying to write this novel. And how was the writing experience this time compared to others? How did you find that? Did it affect you? Did it change the way you wrote?
Well, it certainly affected me, as I think it affected everybody on the planet.
Yeah.
And, you know, I start writing once I've got the idea for the story and I've got the characters sorted and roughly the place and what's going to happen. I have all that in my head early in the year, and then I actually sit down to start writing that first draft. And that's usually February, March. And in the case of Birds of a Feather, I sat down to write it in March last year.
Wow.
And I think we all know where we were in March last year. So then, of course, I was drawn to the media all of the time that was happening. You know, we kept the television going all the time, and we kept trying to find out more. And, you know, like I think lots of people did. And, you know, working from home for me is not different because that's something I do. But the distraction of, you know, was the world going to implode? You know, what was happening to us? And so then, you know, I got to the point where I hadn't got much on paper, and I knew that my, you know, like obviously the world didn't disappear, and we were, as much as it was difficult, we were all still muddling along. So I thought, well, my publisher is still going to want a book at the end of the year, and I haven't done much about it. So I really had to discipline myself to shut. And I think, you know, I've talked to other people in other fields too that are all the same, or people who are at home with children, or whatever it is that you were doing at that time. Lots of them said the same thing. They had to just turn that television off, turn that radio off, go and do something else to distract themselves, because it was just becoming all overpowering at the time. And so then, because of that, I suppose it was natural then a little bit did seep into my story. And I really didn't want to make it a story about COVID, but I write contemporary stories. And so when I'm writing a story, so last year in 2020, I was writing this story, which comes out in September, October 21. So I always think that's where I'm setting my story. And so I had to try and imagine where would we be at that point. So without sort of talking too much about it, I think, you know, there were a few references and move on. And it's more about, I think the story really is more about how we are, you know, we have, like, life throws us challenges in all sorts of ways. COVID's been a huge challenge, but, you know, for some people it might be a divorce or a death or a illness, or, you know, can be anything. And it's how we deal with that challenge and move on that we, you know, makes us who we are. And I think that's the interesting thing for people. So that's more what I tried to do with the story.
Sure. So what's your approach to researching when you're writing a book? Do you do a lot of research? Do you talk to people? Do you read up? What do you do?
Sure. Research is very important because, you know, I don't want anyone, because it is a contemporary story, it is set in real places, you know, I don't want anyone to say to me, well, that can't happen, or, you know, couldn't happen. I mean, they probably will anyway because it's fiction, but I try to make it as realistic as I can. And so I, you know, for this story, for instance, I had, because I'm living in Wallaroo, I had access to prawn fishermen, so I could talk to them about that side of the story. I contacted some research scientists who were a great help with Julia's character, one at the Garvan Institute in Sydney and the other with the CSIRO in Melbourne. So that was fabulous to get their background, you know, for Julia. And then the FIFO workers, you know, I spoke to because that's the life that Lucy is living. And so, you know, what would it be like for her? And I think, you know, that, you know, those people all help me just give that depth of character and richness that, you know, comes with a bit more information. there are other things. I had to test a lot of prawns, to make sure that they were
That would have been hard work.
And in the story, there's I don't know how I can't see this on my little tiny screen, but anyway, this is this is a frog cake.
Yes.
And it is a South Australian icon that happens in the story. This poor little cake I've had for a while now, so it's been in my fridge and it's a little bit squished. But normally, they're a lovely piece of sponge with jam in, and then they have a dome of lovely creamy topping, and then this fondant icing. Yes. And then someone by hand actually cuts the mouth open, and this poor little fella, his mouth sort of gone closed, but he cuts the mouth open and puts the two little eyes on the top. So, that I couldn't help but put that in my story. So, of course, I've had to test a few more frog cakes too to make sure that they're all right. So, research is very
you took me back to South Australia when I was reading about the frog cakes, and I'm lactose intolerant, so I can't have cream, so I can't necessarily eat them, but they are delicious just to have a taste of anyway. And if somebody hasn't tasted one, I would recommend that they do if they're ever in South Australia.
Indeed. When you come, get a frog cake.
Yep, for sure. So looking back over your previous novels, and you have written quite a few novels, which character would you like to have over to dinner and why? It's almost asking you to choose a favourite.
Yes, you want me to ask just one?
You can give us a couple if you like.
My previous novels, I would probably just go back to the last one, which is A Family Inheritance, and I'd pick Felicity this time, I think. I'd take Felicity. We'd go for dinner because so much has happened in her life, and I think, she'd be good fun. She's a bit of a talker, so I think it'd be an interesting dinner. And she also likes wine, so I reckon that she'd bring a good bottle of wine to the dinner.
Always important.
So I'd take Felicity.
Yep. Very good. And what are your tips for aspiring writers? So people who might be just getting into it, or those people who've been trying for a while, what's your tips for them?
I think, stick at it. If it's what you want to do, stick at it. And that means writing as often as you can every day, or if it's not practical every day, then as often as you can. Because, that's the most important thing. It's like anything that you want to be good at, you've got to keep practicing it. And, it doesn't matter if you're writing this for yourself, or you're writing short stories, or you're writing, a novel length story, or whatever it is that you're writing, just keep practicing at it. And the other thing that I think is really important is to join a writers group. I'm in a area where there is a writers group, but they meet during the day. So for me, I had to find, I was working full time. So when I had to find writers groups that were online or accessible in other ways, like you've got Victorian writers, we've got essay writers, there's the state groups, but then through them you can also find often splinter groups. I've done some writing courses, and each of those has ended up with a cohort of people who we've kept in touch. And I'm also a member of RWA, Romance Writers of Australia.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And, it's a fantastic organisation, and you don't have to be a romance writer to join, because they do a lot of focus on the craft of writing, not just romance, but broader. I've got friends who are crime writers who belong to it as well. So, it encompasses all sorts of people and all sorts of writers. And I think that's, you need to, because it is such an isolating thing, writing, you need to be able to build friendships with other writers, and, so you can maybe have a critique partner, or, something like that, just to share.
Yeah. Those networks are really important, aren't they? And I've heard other writers refer to that often, that make yourself those networks, go to those, like you say, those writing groups, because it just gives you that reach into other people that write as well, that you wouldn't have otherwise had a connection with.
That's right. And it it depends to what you're aiming to do. But if, say, you're aiming to write a published novel, then in a group you might find other people like you who, are at whatever stage you're at, from someone who's just beginning to someone who may be published. And so you've got that wide breadth of knowledge, because, then there's more things than writing as well. So, there's other stuff you have to learn along the way.
Yeah, definitely. So what are your other... Oh, sorry, go, Tricia.
Work.
Sorry, I missed that one.
Like how to make teams work.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Very important skill, and unfortunately not as easy as it should be occasionally. So what are your other loves in life apart from writing?
People often say family, and I would say family is my number one. I have a wonderful, close family, and I just love, that family time. I have 2 grandies now, so it's always lovely to spend time with them. But, just other than that, I like to keep fit. So I walk, I kayak, I go along to get fit classes, and I'm a bit of a crafty person too. So I sew and mosaic and do all sorts of, hobby-wise, not too busy, but just, and travel when we can. Travel is always looking for ideas for new stories.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one thing a lot of people are looking forward to, whether we can travel around Australia or, eventually when we can travel overseas again. That's something that people have really missed.
Yes.
As much as we love our own backyards.
Yeah.
So what do you hope readers come away with after finishing Birds of a Feather?
I always hope that people will obviously enjoy the story, but that perhaps they'll have experienced something new or walked in someone else's shoes for a while, just, done something a little bit different. But most of all, I just like them to feel that at the end of the story, everything's sort of come to a good conclusion, and that they're filled just with a sense of, happiness, hope, that it's been a good story and that the characters are okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I guess a feel-good story is how I would describe it. It's the sort of thing I like to read. I don't mind if something's got a bit of gloominess or scariness or whatever in it, as long as it ends well. And so that's what I aim for.
Yeah. And I think that's probably a nice thing for the current times as well.
Oh, well, there's enough, isn't there, without us, without writers dumping more on people.
Yeah. So for the guests that are joining us, if you've got any questions for Tricia, if you just pop it in the chat box or pop your hand up and I can take you off your mute to ask the question. So Tricia, that inevitable question at the end of all interviews, what's next on the horizon? Have you got any sneak peeks for your new titles that are coming?
I have sent the new book for next year off to my publisher, so that's still obviously in early stages. I've worked on it as much as I can to get it to the point where I think it's ready for her to read, and then we'll start getting into edits in a while. But it doesn't have a title. Well, it has a working title, but I didn't ever like it, so I've said to her, we need to come up with something else. But I can tell you that it's about a group of women in a rural setting, not Wallaroo, who all go together to a fitness group.
Yeah.
And things happen.
Right. Sounds like fun.
Well, I hope so. It does involve a time capsule reveal, which does put a cat among the pigeons a bit. But anyway, it's still early days, really. But that's sort of
lovely. And so we've got a couple of questions coming in from the audience, Tricia, so I'll just throw them at you if that's all right.
Sure.
Tracy, who's joining us tonight, says, what is your favourite genre to read yourself?
Oh, Tracy, thank you. I read pretty much everything except for horror. I'm not into that because I've got a vivid enough imagination, I think, without adding to it. But I enjoy, I'd say one thing, I enjoy crime, but then I think I enjoy life lit style books like mine. I've just finished Alan Carter's Crocodile Tears, which is a great Aussie crime. And then I've just after that I read The Unusual Abduction of Avery Conifer by Lisa. Oh, name's gone. Anyway, and that's, I guess, more life lit, I would say. I read just all sorts, really, whatever's going, and always looking for recommendations. I've got all around my house stacks of books, and some I buy, some are library books, and they've got to go back to the library.
Got to go back to the library.
But all sorts, yes.
Yeah. I think as librarians and you as an ex-librarian, I think you never lose that needing to have lots of books around you and a big to be read pile. It's hard to get rid of that.
My own library.
Yeah. Andrea, who's joining us, is asking, can you explain how an editor helps you finalise your draft?
Oh, great question, Andrea. I love the editing process. So what will happen now is that my publisher will, she may have some recommendations. She will get back in touch with me, and then usually what she does is she sends the manuscript with her recommendations straight to the editor. The editor will read it with her recommendations in mind, and also we've worked together a lot, so she knows the style of writing that I have, and she may make some suggestions, and they're things like, I haven't ever had someone want to change my story totally. Obviously, it's more that they get me to dig a bit deeper. Like perhaps I've, had a character that's done something in particular, and I thought I've tidied that all up and made it just right. And they've said, what happened here, or what was she thinking here, or why did she do that? And I think, oh, okay. So it just makes me dig a bit deeper to, flesh that out a little bit more. So it's an interesting process, and as I said, I enjoy it. I think I get a lot of fun out of it because at last I can talk to someone in depth about this story that I've been writing all this time, and they're interested to listen, not like my family whose eyes are glazing over because I thought, she's blathering on about her book again. So we have some great online conversations usually because we're in two different states.
Sure.
But yes, it's it usually I enjoy the process. I think it just, as I say, points out things that I might not have thought of, and sometimes too, they'll say, oh, be kind to your reader here, or the reader would, the reader, I want to know this, so they're really just, sometimes when you write something, you spent so much time with it, you don't realise that perhaps you may have missed a point.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And do you always work with the same editor, Tricia?
I have worked with the same editor for quite a few years, Annabelle Blade. She's fabulous. Often have a different proof editor.
Okay.
But the same main editor, yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. Any other questions from anybody in the audience? Otherwise, we can talk about the book a little bit more. So I'm trying to get this where you can see it, Tricia. It's that background. I'm going to get
How about that?
Yes, thank you. That'll teach me for putting this pretty background in. So, Tricia's book, Birds of a Feather, you can buy at all good bookstores, and I imagine online as well, for sure. Locally, we have our Portland News Agency and Portland Books, who I'm sure, if they don't have it in already, would be happy to try and order you a copy in. I read this on the weekend traveling in the car to Ballarat and back, so it was a great read. I loved the characters in it. I loved the build up of the characters in it and their backstories and their relationships and the country town politics, I guess I could relate to from all different places that I've lived as well in rural areas. So yeah, I highly recommend you give this a read. Of course, we have copies of the library. We have both the audiobook titles, which I know Tracy will be happy because Tracy often listens to the audiobooks rather than reads the hard copy, and it's great. Like you say, while you're
I've listened to it already.
Yeah.
And Casey Withus is the narrator, and she's done a fantastic job. It's just it gave me goosebumps when she started. I just thought, oh, she's made it just come to life so beautifully. It's a really good job.
Yeah, I think the reader often makes the audio books for us.
Yes, it does make a difference. Yes.
Yeah.
I just say to people too, if they've got their own copy and would like it signed. Yes. I am really happy to. I've got these book plates, and they fit. I don't know if you can see that. They fit there on the title page. And so, if people want to email me, and my address is easy. It's Tricia@triciastringer.com. But if you haven't got a pen to jot that down, if you just go to my website and there's a contact me page there, so you can contact me, and if you want to send me your name and address, I'd be happy to fill that out and send it back to you to put in your book, because I just so sad that I haven't been able to come to Victoria and do these events live. I thought, well, at least I could send people a signature to go in their books.
I think that's a fabulous idea, very innovative of you. I haven't seen anyone else doing that, but I love that sentiment.
Well, I was so disappointed when, like we hung off as long as we could, obviously, before we had to say no travelling. And anyway, next time
for sure. We'll look forward to seeing you in person again at our libraries soon. But thank you so much for the chat tonight, Tricia. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, even if it's not in person. It's lovely to see you again, and like I say, hopefully we can welcome you back to Glenelg Libraries in person soon.
I would love to be there. Thank you for having me. It's been great, and I'm sorry about the technology and the mix-up earlier, but we managed it. We were innovative.
Thank you everyone for attending. We'll see you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.